in education, we need to be funding better and going back to the mission statement that Jerry Brown's father wrote back in the 1960s, which said that education for California should be accessible and affordable for all. It is 7 times more expensive to go to school in California today than it was in the 1960s, even after adjusting for inflation. And that's terribly important here in Santa Maria, as I understand from Hilda, who shared with me that there's only 16% of the population in Santa Maria have college educations. You go up to San Luis Obispo, it's 65%. That's an enormous difference. And part of the problem that we have in these very expensive school systems is it's an accelerated wealth and concentration of wealth. You know how we talk about how homes tend to be the largest investment asset that people have today in America? Well, in the 1930s to the 1960s, blacks only had access to loans. About 4%, like 4% of the loans went to blacks in America, to African Americans. Is it any wonder then that they weren't able to carry with them and build wealth because they didn't have the wealth to begin with? Everybody had to start from scratch. You could never get ahead. You could never build value. But the same is true in education today. When only the wealthiest among us can afford to send to the best institutions, the best schools, etc., then other people who can't afford that tend to languish, or they don't tend to get as good at degrees or go to as good as schools. If you have the opportunity to hire somebody from Harvard or from Cuesta Community College, just without even meeting them, there's probably a great prejudice that you're going to vote for the guy from Harvard, right? But we have created this system where we've got the money class and then we have everybody else, unfortunately, And we don't want to take away from capitalism and people's hard work and so forth. But the hardest working people that I found in this district are the first generation immigrants. The first generation immigrants are the ones that work hardest of anybody by far in my experience. And that includes my own family. My sons, I got a son who's, both sons have actually tested in the gifted range. They're mechanics. And you know what they worry about on the weekend? Their video games, and they want to get new rims for their motorcycle. Eric over here has got a full-time job, goes to school full-time, and he wants to contribute to my campaign. I mean, that's an impressive young man here, as far as I'm concerned. Not that I'm not impressed with my own sons, it's just that they're at a level of comfort. They're at a level of comfort. And young men like Eric are striving. And we need to help them because they revitalize the American dream. They make the American dream alive for all of us. And their competitive nature actually pushes for new ideas, new concepts, new inventions, etc., etc. We need to reward that. We know that from studies from Maine and from studies from Virginia, that for every $1 that the community puts into post-secondary education, when I say post-secondary education, I should term it tertiary education as opposed to college. Because I don't know what Eric, I do know what Eric wants to do, but in some cases, people don't want to be attorneys or lawyers or, the same thing, attorneys or doctors or hedge fund operators or, business owners or something like that. They want to be drywallers, plumbers, mechanics, vocational trades like my sons do, right? And for every $1 that we put in, the state of Maine found that it returns $7.46 to the economy. And in the state of Virginia, it was $13. That's a 1,200% return on investment. Why are we not doing that in California? Why are we not doing that so that we can stay competitive with the rest of the world? Why is it today that we have debased science so much that when I went to a debate down at San Marino High School in Santa Barbara and I quoted a study from Harvard, I got groans from the conservative side of the room. Oh, Harvard. How can that be? This is a simple, sound investment. In the United States, the last time that we increased educational standards was in 1915 when we introduced high school in the United States. And cities ran to put in high schools. Why? Because at that time, we had this whole manufacturing explosion. We were now building cars and planes and indoor plumbing and telephones and all of these amazing things. And they needed people to build them, men and women alike. So they created these vocational classes, and guys went in there and got trained. And so when they left high school, they went out and they contributed by getting a job at a local manufacturer, and that generated more money for the city, and cities prospered. And during that period of time, places like Massachusetts had income like this, and rural areas like Georgia, Alabama, Arkansas were down here. And we climbed. Those places that were had lower levels of remuneration for work climbed. So there was not parity, but it was getting closer. And guess where we're going today? It's going just the opposite way. It's going backwards. It's because we're forcing people in poor communities just because their dads chose or their mothers chose to be a janitor, or maybe they chose to be a cook. Maybe they chose to be, you know, field workers or whatever they were. It was their choice, and maybe they enjoy it. Maybe that's their passion. They shouldn't be further penalized so that their sons and daughters don't have the ability to go on and be what they want to be. That's the whole point, the pursuit of happiness. And we need to be able to enable people to do that. So those are the 4 points that I tend to talk about. I also talk about money and bail sometimes if you want to hear about that, because it's one way we can actually help to fund our education system, because California has a very small amount of money that it can utilize for discretionary spending. Something close to 95% of our budget is already committed, right? But we have a small area, 3 to 5%. We have a surplus this year, and I totally understand why Jerry Brown wants to keep that aside, because we have a boom and bust tax cycle. But we can do something like reducing the money bail system. The money bail system is, you are accused of a crime, you go before a judge within 48 hours, and the judge looks at a sheet, and it says that this person is being accused of 5 different crimes because the DA doesn't know which one's going to stick, so they throw all 5 at you right now, beginning until they do more investigation. Now, by script, the judge has to say, well, that's a $500,000 bail. Most people cannot afford $500,000. The bail bondsman steps up and says, okay, well, I'll help them get out of bail, but you now have to pay me 10% of that. So now that person has to go over $50,000. Now let's say that they do that. The family puts all their wealth together, and they manage to come up with $50,000, or they make an agreement with the bail bonds company to pay back the $50,000 on payments. Now what happens if that person is found innocent? He never gets the $50,000 back. Now let's look at it this way. Let's say the family doesn't have the ability to generate the money for a bond. Now what they have to do is leave their son or daughter or themselves in jail. And because the legal grind can take years, oftentimes what happens are innocent people are pleading out simply to get out of jail. And what's happening to the rest of us is that we're incarcerating 62% of our jail population today simply because they cannot afford bail. 62%. And most of those people are not even convicted yet, so they are presumed innocent. And it costs $76,000 per person per year to keep somebody incarcerated. $76,000 a year.
Like your college education.
It's more expensive than going to Harvard, right? More expensive than going to Harvard in a single year. But in addition to that, is there's a cost, because that person who cannot get out of jail can't pay for their car. They can't pay for their rent or their house payment. They can't show up to their job. Now that costs the rest of us even more. And isn't the idea of jail is giving somebody punishment once they're convicted, and then hopefully that we rehabilitate them and then put them back into productive use into our communities. In the state of Alaska, they reduced their prison population by 13%. Remember, California is overcrowded here, right? They reduced the prison population by 13%, and it saved the state $380 million. So that's in Alaska. Imagine what we can do in California. And we could be applying that money towards mental health issues, mental health programs, facilities, schools, et cetera, et cetera. So now I've gotten 5 issues out there. But I should probably stop, because I'm going to talk you all off to death. Is there any questions that I can answer for you about any of this kind of stuff?